Hello, hello.
Welcome.
Happy day.
Hello, Bailey, and hello, Phil.
Thanks for hanging out with us, guys. Hi, Phil.
Good morning.
Happy day. Where are you from, brother?
Vacaville, California.
Okay, where's that at?
About 45 minutes from Oakland, east of Oakland.
Okay.
Awesome. How'd you hear about us, Phil?
I don't know.
You're
I read the book some months ago, and I'm trying to lead the church into a more simple. Actually, it's been probably several years ago since in another church, I was trying to bring in the simple church concepts there. And I just saw this listed somewhere when I was doing something and
Sweet.
thought, well, maybe I'll join in and see what's going on.
Your role as pastor there?
I'm sorry?
Your role as the pastor?
Yes, I'm the pastor.
Cool. Philip, welcome.
Thank you.
And we
We
have
got another Philip joining us here.
Yeah.
And I live in Concord. I'm vacancy pastor at Benicia Lutheran Church, about 40 minutes or less south of Phil Pledger.
Oh, well, cool.
Excellent. And I'm seeing Bailey. Bailey, welcome.
And Russell. Thanks, guys.
And Russell. Sweet. We're going to get started here in just a second. Bailey, do you want to tell us where you're joining us from? If you can hear us.
Carry on, Jack.
Yeah, no, it's okay. Yeah, we're going to go ahead and get started here. Hopefully you can all see what I'm presenting right now. You see a green screen that says Simple Church Webinar on it, hopefully, right? Good. So yeah, we're going to go ahead and get in on with this training. Thanks for joining us. We may have a few more that continue to join us as we get started. So Phil, like you said, you've read the book already and you're looking for more, information maybe about application and some insights on it. For those who are kind of newer with familiarity to the book, this book came out in 2006. And one of the reasons I like it is that it's a data-driven book. There's a lot, just like self-help, right? There's a lot of books out there to help the church. A lot of times these books are anecdotal stories about what an individual may have done. And this is kind of a little bit different in that it's a study of a broad swath of churches. They looked at a sample of 400 and they actually tried to say what's working and what's not working, and can we actually define the things that are different between the two. And so that's where the concept of this book, Simple Church, came from. So as we get started, I'm going to ask the question, and you might even, like, if you want to, in the chat, just kind of give an answer here. We're going to look at a famous study of that was conducted. This is in the marketplace at a grocery store. And it started to reframe the way people start to think about choice. So there was a controlled experiment. And for a week, they had an exhibit where they were selling 6 flavors of jam. This was a controlled experiment. They did then another week. And they said, we're going to have everything exactly the same, but we're going to have 24 flavors of jam. And at the time, the common thought was the more choices, the better. So what would you predict was the outcome? What do you believe created more engagement with customers? And if you want to throw like just a comment in the chat of what you think it would be. Phil, what do you think? Was it more for more flavors or more for less flavors that got more people engaged?
I suppose part of the question is which Phil?
I'll ask you, Phil.
Okay. I was just about to type the chat that from my point of view, in my experience, for me, I get too many choices, my brain shuts down.
Yeah. So that's exactly right. The results were that, and this is interesting, by providing more choices, it did create more interest. There was a little bit more buzz about people coming by to see the booth just because of the novelty of how many flavors were being offered. but it drastically reduced the amount of people that actually made a purchase. So you saw 60% of the shoppers being attracted versus 40%. So that's a third more, right? More people being interested in the booth, but then 10 times as many people making purchases at the booth that had fewer choices. This became kind of a revolutionary study on the concept of simple. And ever since then, a lot of businesses have been leaning into the concept of simple. So you see this in Google, you see this like, the Google search bar is just search and there's hardly anything on the page versus what was before with Yahoo of just endless links of different types of directories to have to navigate through. They just decided we're going to go simple. So guys, you want to chime in? Where else do you see simple in place? Where do you see people reacting to making things more simple?
It's been around for a while, but I love In-N-Out in California, just the simplicity of the menu. And there are chain restaurants that can go pretty large at their menu, but everyone knows you go to In-N-Out and you have a few options and you crave it and the line's always out the window. How about you, Tim?
Right.
Trader Joe's.
Trader Joe's.
The simplicity of shopping at Trader Joe's. They've
Yeah.
limited, it's far smaller in terms
Right.
of options. So yeah, I love it.
So they have, rather than 20 flavors of peanut butter, variants of peanut butter, they may have 3 that they say, we think that these 3 are really good. And so we're only going to sell these 3, right? And it just makes shopping way simpler. I want crunchy, smooth, or, extra crunchy, and that's it. And it just makes the shopping experience way easier. Here's some of the negative side effects that are created when you have too much choice for people. This is from a different study, not related to the book. They talk about analysis paralysis, right? So more options that you get is actually becoming a distraction from moving. So the restaurant analogy is great. So you go to a restaurant and the owner of the restaurant wants you to make a purchase, buy a meal. And so he gives you a menu, and on the menu is 150 dishes. I see this at Chinese restaurants, right? You just sit there and flip through these and you have no clue what's good because there's so many on there. How much time am I actually going to sit here and read all of these descriptions of all of these choices? So by giving so much choice, they're actually inhibiting the activity of actually making a choice to order something. The next thing is buyer's remorse. So, taking it to the next step, I ordered one item off of this menu of 150 things, and maybe I didn't like it, or it was just mediocre. I'm sitting there sitting to myself like, why should I have trusted this choice in the first place? Could they have really made 150 dishes and do it really well? Why should I think it was good versus in a smaller situation, having more trust in those choices, right? So the analogy, right? Think of Gordon Ramsay, if you've ever watched like Hell's Kitchen or kitchen makeover kind of shows. One of the very first things they do is they drastically simplify the menu. And his philosophy with the chef is just have like not even a half dozen things, like maybe 8 things on there that you can absolutely nail. And so the customer sits down and they have a lot of confidence. It's like, well, one of these things is going to be good. And even if it's not exactly what I wanted, at least I know they're giving me their best. And it may just be a matter of personal flavor that I don't like that, but I know that they really created something good because they vetted that experience for me. The final thing, and if you're a pastor or anybody serving in a senior role or an executive role, they can definitely identify this as the concept of ego depletion. And that's basically the rule that the more decisions you have to make in the day, the poorer quality those decisions are. And I can speak for personal experience. I go home exhausted because I'm making decisions all day long, and people are asking me to help make decisions all day long. And so even though I'm not working out or doing a physical job, I feel exhausted because of all the work that I've had to think through to try and make good decisions for folks. And I don't know, certainly Tim and Jake, you can probably sympathize with that as well, that just the work of having to just make constant decisions all the time is exhausting. So why add to that frustration for people, right?
Yep.
They would be thankful if you can ease that burden for them.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Ease it for me, Jack. Make my life easier. Let's go.
So we're going to dive into the difference. And if you read the book, then you've probably heard some of these before, but we're going to talk a little bit about it. So defining the simple church, a simple church is designed around a straightforward and strategic process that moves people, keyword movement, through the stages of spiritual growth. The leadership and church are clear about the process. So there's a keyword clarity, and are committed to executing it. The process flows logically. So there's movement again, and is implemented in each area of the church, which is alignment. And the church abandons everything that's not in the process. So you can extract from that statement the 4 key elements of a simple discipleship process: clarity, movement, alignment, and focus. And I bet you all can guess which one of those things creates the most anxiety for a ministry. If you've tried at all, it's probably, most people would look at that last one, which is focus, and look at that sentence and say, oh, that seems very harsh to actually abandon things. Nobody likes to think of being abandoned, right? So it's a little bit of a scary concept. So one of the good things is we'll round back and we'll share some of the experiences at the Christ Greenfield, what we've done to try and focus more and how we've navigated that situation. Program versus process. One of the things in the book is they'll use the term the traditional church and the simple church, and they're kind of a synonym. Traditional church being program driven, simple church being process driven, right? So the traditional program driven church has a philosophy that says we need to have this parking lot full every single night of the week with some type of program to do something for somebody. We just need this place to be buzzing with activity. We need to basically, if anybody wants to do anything, we want to say yes to anything. And we just want to get this place hopping so as many people are doing as much as possible, right? And the assumption in that is the more that people do, as long as it's in the building or tied to the building somehow, that's getting more people into discipleship, right? And so it's very much a quantity kind of based approach to things. And we've got a few people here working in ministry. I don't know if that's something that you can identify with. Can you identify with that type of church experience where the goal was to just have as many programs as possible? But this is certainly something I can identify with. This has been an evolution for us. We had a process, Tim can talk a little bit about a process of just trying to empower as many, and the intention is good, to empower as many people as possible. You want to share a little bit?
So I inherited an amazing group of people, followers of Jesus, after a season of being told no in a pastoral transition. I came in and really wouldn't undo anything. This is a journey. It's about progress, not perfection. But I felt like we had to release people more and say yes more. Over time, what that did is, in one of our capital campaigns, this is about 4 or 5 years ago, we had a ministry book that was filled, and maybe you can relate, both sides of about, 80 different types of ministries that people were doing. Many of them were like personal ministries, but the struggle was, I want my thing to be known and championed. And we just got to a point, it was a breaking point where we just couldn't. We were losing our focus on multiplying disciples because of the quantity of programs we were offering. All of them good, but could we clarify and simplify that journey? So that's been the Christ Greenfield story here in Gilbert, Arizona, over the last 4 or 5 years. And we'll talk more. But yeah, it's a leadership struggle because you love people. And I have a hard time telling people no. I have a hard time telling people no. Go.
And it's a paradigm shift, right? The idea, so moving from the program church to the process church, as you say, what we care about more than anything is developing disciples. Discipleship development is a process. Therefore, all of our programs should only exist to facilitate that process. That's a big leap. And it can seem offensive maybe to some established ministries to say, oh, what do you mean? Aren't we doing discipleship? Well, are you doing it based on how we're defining it? Are we aligning on the same definition of what it is?
Yes.
Right.
And here's another case for Simple. If the discipleship process of the program traditional church was working, would the American church be declining at the rate it is right now? If the output was multiple disciples and leaders, let's just say pastors was one of the outputs you'd look at, would the American traditional church, for many of us in the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, would that trajectory be declining at the rate it is right now? And I would say no. So we've got to look at our process rather than just programs. Busy does not necessarily mean effective at multiplying disciples.
Amen. So another thing that you would see different between the two churches is the calendar, right? In the traditional church, you got a ton of things going on every single night of the week. Things are humming. And there's even a lot of negotiation going on. Well, I want to use this space on Thursday. Well, no, this other group wants to use the space on Thursday. Okay, well, I'm gonna have to move you later. And then, well, I need a bigger space. And so the staff may find themselves spending an inordinate amount of time talking about the calendar. In the Simple Church, that's not necessarily the case. That is greatly reduced. You're not focusing on events as the key thing, or programs as the key thing. You're focusing on process. And so you shouldn't be as busy. In fact, maybe spend very little time being as busy as the program-driven church, right? And if there is, how is that tied to your process? Let's say something midweek. Numbers and metrics are another big thing. The traditional church looks at key things like attendance, right? So it's like, how big is this thing is what they're trying to measure. How many people are in worship? How many people came to our big event, our big retreat, right? And so attendance tends to be, and giving tends to be the key numbers that they look at. But the Simple Church will look differently at things. They will look more at the numbers that measure movement. How many people are moving through a process, right? And so it's good for those churches to kind of define what are those measurements that measure movement. A good example is you can record the number of people attending, or you can really hyper focus on how many new people are attending, how many second time people are attending, how many third people, 3 times are they attending. And really, that's where the Simple Church focuses on. They would say, who's coming here new, who's being retained, and that's more important than how big things are. And it might be for their small groups program, who's joining a small group, who's starting a small group, rather than saying we got 50 small groups. It's that they're focusing day to day on the movement. And if the movement's not there, that means there's a bottleneck, because that's where the work has to be, is to get rid of those bottlenecks. We've another great analogy is to say, as a church, what best represents you? Are you a lake, or are you a river? Are you here to accumulate, or are you here to let people flow through? Like the disciple building church is focusing on movement, and that movement may mean that people flow through the church, and when they flow through, they're being equipped and released to go start new things and do new things, and maybe be a new church somewhere else and plant a new church. That's what the flowing means, right?
And I think if movement, Jack, this is great. If movement sounds strange or process sounds corporate, incorporate the journey of spiritual growth, the characteristics of a follower of Jesus as they mature in him. So we're going to focus on growth, on progress. Those are all synonyms to say movement and process. Yes.
This is an interesting thing, how the Simple Church and the traditional church deal with felt needs or new ideas, right? So let's say the church says, we got to deal with an issue in our community. Marriages are falling apart. We need to address marriages. And so what will a church do is they may have a marriage retreat, or they may say, we're going to do a big marriage seminar. And those are good things, right? But that would be kind of the immediate go-to for the traditional church. And because they're doing that all the time, they're often doing things that compete with each other, right? So we know marriage is an issue. We know parenting is an issue. So we'll have on this week a marriage seminar, then we'll have a parent seminar. And we think that they don't conflict with each other because they're on different weekends. But the reality is, if they're in the same quarter, they're probably conflicting with each other because families are so busy, right? So what the Simple Church does is they try to take those felt needs and they try to address it through the small number of existing programs that they have. Oftentimes it would be like small groups. So if they know that marriage is a problem in the local church, then they would preach about marriage and they would provide great material for their small groups about marriage and equip the small groups to do that. Or if there's any other kind of felt need, you may start small groups about raising up men and, you know, having men embrace their role in marriage. So there's ways to kind of hit those same felt needs, but not necessarily create endless numbers of programs to help hit those felt needs. But we'll talk more about that later, because it's kind of, for us, it's been a little bit of a both and that's where there's some nuance to this. Staffing, this is a big deal. So in the Simple Church, the traditional church, rather, the program church, they're recruiting superstars. If we can just recruit some superstars here, we can get people excited about this program because we've got this charismatic person that's getting people charged up, right? And so you're getting these aggressive workers, but oftentimes these aggressive workers have their own vision. And if you've got multiple superstars working in different departments, you may even find that they're running contrary to each other. Does the worship director have a similar vision to the youth director on how things should go? And they may both be superstars, but they've got a different idea. And that those different ideas may create conflict. It's called running in different directions, right? But the Simple Church, what they say is, well, we care about hiring to support the process. So if the process is important and we're promoting this process, we should be able to pull people from within, talented people from within. And the reason they're passionate is because they're passionate about the process. So we hire people primarily around the passion that they have about supporting and building the process. It's a movement away from the doer to the developer, right? You want to talk more about that, Tim?
No, I just was hoping you brought that paradigm.
Yeah. And so
we train mostly doers, and we very rarely give them the elevated invitation. And this is all discipleship. How did Jesus raise up the 12 and then the 70? He invited them to do as they watched him do. He was developing them. He was debriefing with them. So yes, doubling down on, we don't pay people to just do. If we're on payroll here, we're all developers. And that goes down to our job descriptions. Talk about job descriptions, Jack. Yeah.
Yeah, and actually maybe I'll ask Jake to talk about, he's been doing a lot of job description work here, but let's talk about, Jake, you want to talk about the sort of people and system and how that works with job descriptions?
Yeah, I mean, even this, the title of a person's job to add developer at the end changes the culture to say you're hired to develop people. You're the vicar of development. You are the pastor of development. You are the secretary of development. And if you just put on the job description, but you don't talk about it ever again, and you don't build a culture of development, then they're not going to develop anyone. But when you really identify in job description too, the character and competencies that they need, one of the character traits could be a love to see people be developed. And then the competency would be the ability to have an apprentice that is eventually going to replace you. So you can go on to do other things as well. So important, however you want to do in your church, to put that kind of language in there and then actually live it out and keep them accountable to it.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, so our head of our central media team, his title is Director of Central Media Development. So he's developing the team. He's developing the systems behind that. Everything is development focused. So the other key thing about recruiting internally then is, this is awesome. It's this kingdom multiplication, right? Think about what that does for the greater kingdom. When you raise people up internally, more leaders doing more work to disciple more, raise up more disciples, versus I want to go hire a superstar and pull them from their existing job and put them into this job. That's not kingdom multiplication, that's kingdom redistribution, right? So that's an important thing to think about when we're staffing. Are we multiplying God's kingdom, or are we redistributing it because I'm taking that talented leader from one place and putting them in another place?
And if you hear staffing, they don't all have to be paid, by the way.
Oh yeah.
Your building
Exactly.
team, we're always doing ministry and team. And so just even talking about your non-paid staff, we're about developing here. That's great, Jack.
Yep. Announcements are different. The traditional church will give a ton of announcements. And this is one thing that we can definitely sympathize with or have experienced personally. I remember coming out of a worship service one time, we were doing everything by video, and it was just this reel of announcements going on and on and on and on. And it was like 8, well, I used the number 8. I think it was literally 8 different announcements. I'm sitting here thinking, by the time you've given the 8th announcement, everybody's forgotten the first 3 announcements. So this is, we're just fighting each other here, you know? So the simple church, you know, no more than 3 announcements, but keep it to no more than 3. And it's usually always tied to, if you're new here, here's your next step. If you've been with us for a while, here's your next step. And it's really geared towards how do you just deepen your engagement and do your next step in discipleship more than anything, right? Anything to add?
What I love about this is it gives clarity. So when you're in the traditional church model and everyone can make an announcement, there's just not clarity. I mean, I guess there's clarity that everyone can make an announcement, but even if you start to push back, a lot of times it's personal preference. The pastor really likes this one and that ministry over that one, and it really gets diluted versus as a team with the simple church, the lens in which you're looking is through movement and the process. And it allows you then to, I think, let people down gently, and then also equip them with other methods like Facebook or going to promote it themselves. And it really can have them be the cheerleader then of the personal ministry that they have.
Yeah. The most precious resource that you have, other than just the people, the most precious resource is the people and the Holy Spirit. But beyond that, when you think about tangible things, is not even money, it's people's attention, right? You've got a very short window on that Sunday or a very short window on that social media post to get people's attention and get them engaged on something. And they don't want to hear 8 announcements. They want to hear something meaningful that impacts them and gets them to move on you know, something very specific to them. Yeah, we talked about that. Key paradigm shift for leaders. We just talked about this a little bit. The traditional church is we're all program directors, right? We're here to run our program. And kind of the analogy is we're all travel agents. That's another analogy. So if somebody says, hey, I want to get connected, a person might say, well, here's a list of things that you can get connected to, like the travel agent. Here's a list of countries you can visit. Which one would you like me to book, right? That's the travel agent mentality. As opposed to in simple church, they're process developers, people in process developers, and it's more like the ministry is a travel guide. So the travel guide is with you. They work with you and they make sure that you get to the destination that you need to get and maybe give you information on the way there, right? So think about the difference. I like to use the analogy of a relay race. So one runner in a relay race, they have to pass the baton to another runner. And if the baton is dropped, you both have to stop and somebody has to pick up that baton. You can't continue the race without the baton or you're disqualified. So you have to pick up the baton. So that's the most important thing. It's not about giving people choices of things they could do. It's like actually handing them off from one step to the other. And that's how you define success in ministry. We're going to talk a little bit about implementation. So we're going to head back to those concepts of clarity, movement, alignment, and focus. Clarity then, a little bit more definition on that. So this is kind of a reflection question. You could even comment if you want. What percentage of your members have a clear understanding of your discipleship process? Could they very simply recite that back to you if you ask them to explain it?
And another question could also be, do you have a clear understanding of your discipleship process?
Right. And you might say, I understand these 25 steps that I want people to do, right? But is that something that can be internalized into your membership? Can they internalize those 25 steps? Or you know, you need to narrow that down to get something to make it more tangible to people. But that's a great question that leaders should be asking themselves when they think about their discipleship systems. Do people understand it? Can they even understand it? I love that, Jake. Do I even understand it? Does your entire staff understand it? Are they all on the same page of what they're doing? If you have a low percentage, I mean, you could even poll your congregation. If there's a low percentage of people say they understand, that means you have poor clarity, right? And poor clarity is preventing effective discipleship. It's the enemy of movement. So again, going back to that original definition, the simple church is designed around the straightforward and strategic process. That means complexity is not welcome. You have to build a culture even where you say, we're going to resist complexity. And that is hard. The process itself is the how and the strategic. So you're aligning on this process. That is your strategy. And so a lot of churches, they'll even create a vision statement or a mission statement or a ministry tagline. And that tagline is like very, very tightly knit to their discipleship process. So you'll see one of the examples in the book. Our tagline is love God, love your neighbor, serve the world. Okay, great. So what is your discipleship process? Well, we love God, we love our neighbors, we serve the world. That's our discipleship process. So they worship, they go into small groups, and they serve. And that's great. That's like perfect alignment right there. You can't argue with that. And so that's tremendous clarity. Good examples, right? If you're implementing this, this is like getting nitty gritty here. How do I actually do this in my local church context? Typically, they'll say 3 to 5 programs or activities that you genuinely want every single member in some capacity to participate in. So, and that's a key thing. If you're not asking everybody to do it, then it's probably not one of those key things. If it's go to a Bible study, then you really need to say, I want every person to go to a Bible study. If it's serving, then you really want to be able to say, and this is, you know, a paradigm shift even. We genuinely want literally every person to serve on a team in some capacity, if they're willing to do it. We will find, you know, if we're overwhelmed with volunteers, we will find things for them to do. We will increase our vision to make sure that they're put to good work. So the 3 most common is worshiping, small groups, and serving in some capacity. There's others that churches might add in there. I've seen some churches say we want everybody to do 5 things. And so they might add like giving, or they might add some sort of a study thing. Or I've seen this a lot, giving testimony. We want all of our members, you see this in a lot of non-denoms, we want all of our members in some capacity to let us know that they're giving their testimony to other people. So these are kind of others that they might tack into it or swap out. But that's something for your team to really reflect on and say, if we're really developing disciples, raising up disciples, what are the types of environments, what is the type of thing, the activity that leads to deepening their faith? And this is a great idea. What is actually transforming them from a consumer to a contributor, right? What is actually transforming them from a disciple to a disciple maker and helping you in the Great Commission? Tim, you got any other sort of like filter questions to add about that?
No, just to double down on that, brother, that we are not, and I don't think the urgency has ever been stronger than in the midst of COVID, and hopefully on the other side of COVID. And people, we can kind of spend this time like lamenting, oh, we don't have as many people. Like, no, the fervor of the few, like those that are with you right now, are we preaching in such a way that invites them to grow and to use their gifts and to evangelize their neighbor, to create space for Jesus conversations? This is all discipleship conversations. This is the role of the pastor, equipping the saints, Ephesians 4, for love and good deeds, rather than just being a doer, a purveyor of religious services. Now's the time to dig in, even if you got fewer folks with you, into their role as a priesthood of all believers.
Cool, thank you. We'll talk a little bit about movement. So the key concept with movement is it's sequential steps in a process that causes people to move from one area of commitment to the other. Again, we've used like the concept of the relay race. Don't drop the baton, make sure the other person grabs the baton. Movement is how someone is being handed off from one level of commitment to another. It doesn't always have to be linear. Church can say, we want people to do these 3 things. And, you know, in the modern church, it might not be worship that's the front door for everybody. It might be a side door for some people that get them in. But generally, you can kind of think of a logical order for people. Typically, worship is number 1. So if people engage you with worship first, what is the next step beyond worship, right? What is that next logical step that you want to hand people off to? How is there a team of people that's actually making sure that that happens? And what are you measuring? That's the key thing. What are you measuring to make sure that you're successful on it? So I'll give you some examples of ministries that exist for that purpose. They exist solely for the purpose, pretty much, to get people from one point to another point, right? So a first impressions or hospitality team exists to move somebody from a first-time guest to a regular worshiper. That's their job. So if they're not equipped to do that, and you don't see the data of people becoming first-time to recurring worshipers, that's one area, key area that you can double down on. A next steps ministry, that's something we've been leaning into heavily in our local congregation, is, okay, we just assume that you're a regular worship here. What's next for you? Small group or serving? And so do we have a team that's dedicated to having really fantastic conversations around that, and will stick with somebody and hold their hand and make sure the baton is handed off to the appropriate person? So that's something that we're actually leaning into right now. Starting point, this is for your new folks, like they actually know what's expected of them. So hopefully your hospitality team, your first impressions team, is getting them, if they're jazzed about your church, hey, come join us for starting point, so that you can hear about our vision and what's expected of them, right? This even becomes a first point to understand what the discipleship process looks like. If I'm committing to your church, what am I committing to? And so it should be right up front. Here's what we want people to do. A spiritual gifts class. Help people, this is tied to our mission statement. We want people to know their spiritual gifts so that they can pursue their unique individual calling that's specific to them. So, they're using their gifts to be the right part of the body. And so a successful spiritual gifts class is not just a class. It's saying, hey, I see in you that you've got these talents, and these talents are going to be a great fit for this ministry. Can we have a conversation with that leader? Can we pray about this? And that would be the measure of success for a spiritual gifts class, not the fact that 50 people attended the class, right? So this is reframing things. It's how many people do a next step after the class, not how many people attend. And you have to make that clear. Go ahead, Tim.
Yeah, do you have any more bullets?
Just a community outreach. And this is reaching people that are unchurched. And so if you've got something that is for the felt needs of the community, let's say it is a parenting class, that parenting class, even though it has nothing to do, let's say, with discipleship, ultimately you're trying to build a relationship and pull them into a next step with discipleship. It might be try us for worship, that kind of thing.
That's great. Awesome. Digital. What is the next step for people that are engaging with you online? That is your front door. The way we talk about it here, that is your front door. And we're not, remember the early days of COVID, you're kind of boasting because, oh, we got, 100 or 1,000 or 10,000, who knows, whatever. But they're all anonymous. So what is a next step process to get them, one, connected to your maybe Connect card or something like that to identify I am here? We would love to see movement then in a number of different, it could be first time giver, first time on one of our campuses, whatever it is. So we want to identify that a next step in the digital realm, which hopefully for all of us is not going away. If we're backing off of digital at all, I think it's a major miss right now. It's a front door. It's a narthex for us longtime Lutherans. This is the narthex,
Mhm.
or especially the new believer or the young believer.
Yeah. So yeah, in a lot of cases, it's there, you know, a lot of people will try before they buy. They'll be a guest. And so this is kind of even like the new guest experience, is to try online. There's no commitment there. Nobody even sees them as a guest, so they can be anonymous, and they may even want that for a period. So how is that anonymous experience, like Tim said, become something where you can actually recognize that person and engage with that person? Very good. Alignment. All right, so I like to use the term everybody pushing the same lever in the same direction, right? Alignment is the arrangement of all ministries and staff around the same simple process. It ensures we're all moving in the same direction, right? I've used the term pushing the same lever. All ministries are operating from the same blueprint, right? So if worship, small groups, and serving is what you've defined, it may not be, but if that's what you've defined, and you've got a youth program, is your youth program in a very age appropriate way inviting those kids to do worship, small groups, and serving? Contextualized for the youth, appropriate for the youth, right? Teens, college, families with kids, seniors, are they all being invited to the same thing? Because this is where we believe that discipleship happens. That's the key question. A caution for leaders. This is where it gets a little messy. All church leaders will want to, if you're ambitious, will want to drift away from alignment. Staying aligned is an intentional process. The job of the leader is to ensure that this doesn't happen. If you're the senior leader, the senior pastor, some sort of executive role there, I like to use the term, you are the reminder in chief. You're there to constantly remind people that they are process developers, and we are to align on a similar process. If you don't like it, talk about what you don't like and let's make it better, right? But at least you care about being that process developer. Here's a great question for people to ask when people have ideas for ministry, is ask the simple question, what are you trying to solve for with this? Okay, you want to do this event. What are you trying to solve for with this event? Are you trying to solve for fellowship? Like people have a need for fellowship? Okay, well, maybe small groups is the best place to do fellowship rather than creating this new thing. Are you trying to reach out to a felt need for men? Men need like, they need to be uplifted and they need to be strengthened in their role as husbands. Okay, can you form small groups for men, right? We got a team that wants to do quilting. Great. They see quilting as serving. We're like, well, actually, this is really more about fellowship. Why don't you do a small group where you all get together and quilt, but then you do a couple things that we want your small group to do because we care about small groups, right? So it's a way of saying, what is the legitimate thing that you're trying to solve for? For staff, they shouldn't even be bringing things up unless they're trying to solve for something in the process, right? I'm trying to solve for worship. I want to get more people into worship. I want to do a special event because it's going to get more people into worship. Okay, that's a legitimate thing then, because that's getting people into the process. Focus. This is the scary one. This is the one where you're going to have likely the most hurt feelings. Focus is the commitment to abandon everything that falls outside of the simple ministry process. So what we like to say is say yes to the best and say no to everything else, right? Scary, scary, scary. Nobody wants to be left out in the cold. It makes everybody anxious. This is what I'm going to recommend. These are practical steps. The first thing is very, very, very much for a season of time, if you're implementing Simple Church, really, really, really focus on alignment more than anything. I gave some of those examples, right? An existing program could get rolled into your process with some changes. So the very first thing is, here's some changes that we want you to do so that you're a contributor to this process rather than just doing your own thing. And we have had a lot of success with that. A hiking ministry became a hiking small group. Quilting ministry became quilting small group. Men's ministry becomes maybe multiple men's small groups. Women's ministry becomes women's small groups. So So yeah, that's the key thing.
Jack, I think the thing to add there is
Yep.
the alignment is around that word small group, but we're not marketing, we're not focusing, we're not inviting, shoulder tapping, whatever language you want to use, to go to Martha's, I don't know if it's Martha's quilting group, whoever it is,
Right.
or any, it's just, this is the mechanism. Oh, and by the way, leader, you're the one who's taking responsibility for
Right.
inviting people into your small group with a focus on quilting or hiking or whatever it is.
So yeah, so you know, Sally says, I want an announcement about my quilting group. I said, well, we announce small groups and you're a part of that. So we're going to encourage people there. And if somebody wants to find a specific one that's targeted to quilting, then they have the choice to do that. But our goal is not to get people quilting. That's not the discipleship outcome, right? The goal is to get people into small groups, right? So if that's an attractional need and somebody finds that attractional, then we bless that and we help them to do that. But that's not what we're advertising. That's not what we're promoting, right?
Amen. The ultimate goal is multiplying disciples who proclaim the name of Jesus. We want people to be in relationship where they're talking about Jesus, taking the name of Jesus to their neighbors. That's the ultimate goal. So what's the environment that's going to put them in that sort of focused momentum building movement? And for us, it's relational small groups.
Yep. Here's kind of then the last step, which is after you've done a whole bunch of work to do alignment, you're still going to have some ministries that it just doesn't make sense. It doesn't align. So what you're going to do then is you're going to release those ministries, and you're going to do that in a very loving and very open way. And you're going to have some really great language behind that. So what we did is we created some language to clarify what the difference was between a personal ministry and a church ministry. If you're worried about what it looks like to focus and get everything focused, come up with some language in your team and say, we define a church ministry to be this thing, and we define a personal ministry to be this thing. In our particular case, church ministry is tied to discipleship. If it's not discipleship oriented, then it's probably not church ministry, but it's still ministry. And so I've given this analogy before. If a Christian goes to a hospital and volunteers at a hospital and helps mend somebody's broken bones, that's an amazing ministry. They're serving the community. They're doing something out of love for their neighbor. And we want to celebrate that. That's a good thing to do. But if it's not related to getting people connected into discipleship, even though it is ministry, it's not church ministry. So church ministry is getting people into discipleship. It may even be hitting a felt need, like we've talked about before, something in the community, but somehow using that felt need to get them into discipleship. So if it doesn't fit in there, we're going to say, you know what, this handicapped dog ministry that you're doing is a great ministry, and we're going to call it personal ministry, and we're going to bless you in it. And we may even share stories. We'll celebrate sometimes the personal ministry that you're doing, but we're going to give resources to the church ministry. So we're going to give the announcements, and we're going to give the budgets to the church ministry, right? So that becomes the tool, kind of the handle to kind of do focus. And that's worked out very well for us. But in order to do that, you have to give that definition and kind of be able to give examples of like, well, this type of thing we would call personal, this type of thing we would call church ministry. All right. We're going to do a little bit of Q&A soon here, but before we do that, I just do want to mention this book is now considered kind of an old book. We would say that this book is valid, that it's correct, that the data supports it. But also in the many years of working to implement it, we also feel that it would also be correct to say it's incomplete in some ways. And so we would say it's good, it's true, it's foundational for understanding church systems. We want all of our staff to know it and to kind of memorize even some of the key concepts of it. But we have to think a little bit more broad about it. And so what I would say is the assumptions of the book is that kind of sort of assumption is that you're living in a Christian society, that of your 3 programs, one of those programs is definitely going to be your front door. And that's not necessarily something that you can assume anymore. You can't assume in what's becoming a post-Christian society that come to worship is your front door now. There's a lot of folks out there that even if you tell them our worship experience is great, they say no thank you, because they think of you like the Mormons. So if your Mormon neighbor came to you and said, come to my worship, it's really awesome, we've got great hospitality, you say, no thank you, you're a Mormon, I don't want to have anything to do with it. So they would think maybe the same way about Christians in general, Lutherans. So what we understand now is that there's things that have to happen even before, a lot of times before they're even open to an invitation into worship. And those are not necessarily a program that every single person is going to do. So it's a little bit maybe a more sophisticated view of that. And then what happens after discipleship? If you're actually trying to multiply disciples, is there a program that exists that's not for everybody, but it is for those who are starting to lean into a calling to be a leader? So leadership development and then attracting people in before they even start to engage in discipleship. So we've been working with, partnering with an organization called Glue. And we've been learning and adopting, and kind of one of the churches that are trying to pioneer the use of something called the church engagement model. And we're still keeping a lot of the philosophies of simple church, but the church engagement model talks about 5 key jobs of the church, that everything that you're doing is trying to achieve 5 jobs. Those 5 jobs are attracting. So attracting basically says people in the community know about us and they think positively about us. It's these people may be anonymous, but you're visible and they think positively. That's what it is to attract. Then there's getting, and getting is where you actually get to have an interaction with somebody and you can identify that person. So if somebody shows up for worship and fills out a connect card, that's a get. If they sign up for VBS and this is the first time you've heard of them, that's a get. If you host a concert on your campus and they sign up because they bought a ticket and you got their info, that's a get. So the key thing, the difference between getting and attracting is getting is you can actually get there, you get to know somebody, at least for the first time. The next job then is to retain. So that's to convert first-time interactions into multiple time interactions with the ultimate goal of getting them into discipleship. So there's 4 key processes that every church has to have for retention. What do you do for new worshipers that show up for the first time? What do you do for new givers, first-time givers? What do you do for people that show up at an event for the first time, like a Harvest Fest? And what do you do for people that show up for, if you're hosting like a class, a felt need class, or a retreat or something for the community? What are you doing to retain them? So what are you inviting them to? How are you using that time of relationship that you're building with them to create trust and invite them into discipleship, right? Now we get into discipleship, and I've got a little call out there. That's where we see simple church happening. That's where there's the small group serving and worship all happening. And we've kind of created that as a circle because people are just going to churn in that. They're going to churn and they're going to grow, and they may drop out of serving for a while and then come back into serving for a while. But that's the place where you're trying to grow people and you're trying to move people from consumers into contributors in those environments. And then finally, when they've matured enough and grown enough in their faith in that environment, they move from the contributor even to a leader. And then you've got a great leadership development program in your church to raise up new ministry leaders and even new vocational leaders. And so that's what we call the church engagement model. It's complementary, we believe, to simple church, but it kind of adds on to what we kind of thought is an incompleteness to simple church, if that makes any sense. Any questions now? This is just a time to kind of reflect. And Tim, you got any more comments to share?
No, and the last thing, and I think we got some notes on this, and I got to bounce, is that we would love to have you, if you're interested in best practices on that continuum. We're going to be offering 3 different webinars. They'll be somewhere between 2 and 4 hours. We'd love to have you and your team. If they're on the next slide, that'd be wonderful to hit it. So yeah, we're doing Joining Jesus on His Mission, very, very discipleship focused there on September 30th. But then the team workshop offered on October 28th will all be on Attract. And Attract looks way different today than it did 2 years ago. and you all know why. So we would love to bring you in, and you and your team, to explore that more. Simple discipleship is a big deal, but it's a much broader thing. And the ultimate output, couldn't stress it enough, are new followers of Jesus, passionate followers of Jesus, folks who are entrepreneurial and want to start new types of ways, new types of ministries, churches, to reach those who don't know Jesus. So
Yeah.
it's
So
been
the
a joy to
next,
be with you guys today, and looking forward to continuing the relationship. Good job today, Jack.
yeah. So those next workshops that are coming up, starting in October, we're going to be focusing on the attract, get, retain. So we're just going to be looking at that. And then in the future, having more depth about your discipleship process. And then if you guys are ever interested, we host the Leadership Development Accelerator. We've got a new cohort starting next week already. And that's a year-long intensive where groups are coming, and they're coming in person to do like 3 days at a time, training, best practices, great guest speakers that we're pulling in. And then it's over a period of a year, like 3 sessions that we do. And we come alongside these churches and help them to implement really great, robust leadership development systems in their local church, raise people up internally, all the way up from team leader into even staff position roles. Let's see, any questions, just kind of going back, any more questions that anybody has from the presentation so far? Any follow-up thoughts?
I have a question. You'll probably do this. You initially asked, how did I find out about this? And I just realized all these Lutherans online here. I got it from the California, Nevada, Hawaii District newsletter to the pastors.
Cool.
So that's how I got it. But my question is, will these other workshops and seminars be advertised in some other way, or just on this slide that I didn't take notes on very well?
You know, we have your, Tanya, you can confirm this. We have your email address. And so we're distributing this to the local districts and counting on the districts to distribute it. But, and so if you're not getting it from your local district, let them know that you want to get these. Otherwise, if we have your email address, we will also distribute these to you as well.
Okay, I'm very interested.
Yeah, awesome. What was your takeaway, Phil? Thank you for being engaging today. What was your takeaway today?
Well, other than more questions, the church engagement model, I think, does fill in some of the gaps that it seems to me. But I'm struggling to the way I've been telling the congregation, we're kind of rebirthing the congregation. We've had the congregation, I've only been here about a year and a half. It's gone through numbers of trials and tribulations over the years. And I'm trying to get them to understand these concepts, some of which I took some copious notes on. And but anyway, the church engagement aspect, I think, kind of fleshes out my thinking on it much better than the simple church all by itself.
Great. So you may be interested in attending those coming October. So the first one that hits in October is just going to be all attract, and we're going to be collecting all of the best practices that we can find as they relate to attract, and then maybe a little bit towards the get. And then the following session will all be about get. How do you get people, right? What are those get strategies? And then the third one will be in depth about retention. So I think we've got three sessions that we're planning on doing. Is that right, Tanya? Yep.
Sorry, yes, I was on mute. Yes, so
Yeah.
we have 3 sessions coming up.
Cool.
Okay, and then I probably should know this too, but since I didn't even remember how I knew about you, is this a Lutheran thing or something, or?
Yes. Yeah. So yeah, just a little bit about the story of the ULC. This is an offshoot from Christ Greenfield. The vision of Christ Greenfield is to launch 20 campuses in 20 years.
Oh, okay.
So we know as a very aggressive vision that the key bottleneck is actually having enough leaders to do that. Our worship is very popular. It's growing. We've got, prior to COVID, we were about 1,100 on a Sunday. Now with online, we're close to 1,600 averaging over the last 6 months, and in person. We're at 2 campuses right now. We've launched our second campus in East Mesa. And the vision is just keep going forward and launching campuses, but we need leaders, we need pastors, we need directors, what we call campus directors, youth directors, worship directors. We have to raise people up into leadership roles. And so we created the Unite Leadership Collective because we wanted to curate all of the great leadership development practices out there. And we figured if we're doing that for us, why don't we give that away? This is a great opportunity to bless the wider church. And so a lot of the content, we've been partnering with a lot of groups. We partner with Glue. We partner with a Leadership Network. So the accelerator that we're running is actually kind of a rebranded version of their accelerator content, which was much more expensive, but we've rebranded it, made it less expensive, and made it very, very applicable to smaller Lutheran churches, which is kind of the core that we're trying to reach out to.
Cool. Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah, excuse me. Could I just wanted to thank you, Jack, for this presentation, because it's something that will help our church develop its discipleship program to make it more clear to the members.
Awesome. Thank you, Russell. What was your key takeaway?
And the key takeaway was being more organized so you understand what you're doing in the church. A lot of people just go to church to say that they're going to church and they're taking communion and hearing the word, but it's a little bit more than that. It's to make disciples, to grow in Christ and to be able to share it with other people.
Awesome. Amen. Can you
Amen.
remind me what's your role there, Russell?
I'm the elder, I guess the elder chairman at Emmanuel Lutheran Church.
Perfect. And
On
Emmanuel's
Maui.
located where?
On Maui, Hawaii.
In Maui. Awesome.
Nice.
Maybe we should do the accelerator where you're at.
Yeah.
Yeah. Other Philip, any key takeaways? Any other questions?
Found it interesting, helpful. Yeah, the cafeteria approach certainly is widely accepted, and we smaller congregations have difficulty competing against the mega churches, which have picked up quite a few of our members because we don't have the broad diversified program to offer people. I like that you did indicate that you do use these felt need groups like a marriage or parenting workshop. But the point is that you feed them into a small group with that focus. And it seems like you really have to do that because there's no way a small congregation can start a small group for say, couple relationships. And in California, we got the dilemma.
Yeah.
It can't be a marriage, it's got to be a couple, and how the heck do you deal with all that, et cetera. And also, if you're talking about any quote relationship that has any sexual dimension, you want to protect your backside so you don't get sued up the gazoo or be made a spectacle of in the local community because you're not fitting in with the political societal norm.
Yeah, it's difficult, but the church is the hope of the world, right? Through Jesus.
Yeah.
We are providing people with answers for what's not working right now. And I think that's where you get to lean into the felt needs. You know, if you're doing something really dysfunctional in your relationship, you know, we've got answers. We've got answers to that. And there's people that want answers, let's say about relationships, about parenting. They want those answers. They're not ready for answers about maybe the Bible yet.
Right.
But they want answers for that. And if you can give them the church is extremely equipped to tell people how to be better stewards of their money, how to be great parents, how to be a great spouse, right? So we're really, really well